Oh man, I'm so tired of just watching Lord of the Rings over and over and over again. If only there was something new coming out that lent the same experience.
Oh, but Robert, there is. The third Dune movie's coming out, and then that'll be the Dune trilogy, which is basically just the new Lord of the Rings. Am I right, Colin?
Welcome to Saga Sessions, a show where we explore, analyze, and discuss John's favorite stories.
Yes, specifically me.
We're talking about if whether or not Dune, which at the moment is just 2 films, if whether or not Dune is the next Lord of the Rings. John and Robert are joining me today because they both have vast knowledge of Dune, more so than I do, so I'm surrounding myself with people who know more than I do, and that's one of the best things you can do to be a good creator. Take it
So
away,
true.
John.
Vast may be a little bit of an overstatement, but I'll do my best. But yeah, thank you for having me. I am a big believer in Dune being the next Lord of the Rings, specifically for movies, but I think it also applies to the books a little bit. And there's a few things kind of cooking into this other than just me really enjoying both trilogies. But I think if we're going to talk about these 2 trilogies being connected, I think we do kind of have to start at the beginning with the books and like the authors as well. For those who don't already know, the authors themselves kind of have a history in that people who read Dune when it was coming out back in like 1965, I think, fans of Lord of the Rings read Dune and were like, oh, we see the similarities. We see the same vibes. What if I just like sent this book over to Tolkien and told him to read it? So at some point, one of Tolkien's friends, I think, gives the book to him. And then like we don't really hear anything else for like another few years until some other fan sends him a copy of Dune as well. And then Tolkien basically writes back to this fan and says, yeah, I already got a copy of this book already. Was not a fan. I think his exact words were, I disliked Dune rather intensely. Do you want me to just send you the book back? Which is
Wow.
like a wild thing to say. But needless to say, Tolkien was not a fan of Dune, which I think like there's a lot of reasons for. But hearing that kind of like is what triggers in my mind, I think, them being a little bit connected. And I think there's a lot of reasons why fans of both series kind of connect them, myself included. And I think one of the biggest reasons is that both of these series, I think, originally in book form, but now like we could definitely see it kind of coming to fruition in film form as well. Both of them were really the blueprints for their specific genres. So we see today that like any time a fantasy series, whether it's book or whether it's TV show or movie, whenever any of that comes out, it's always naturally kind of compared to Lord of the Rings, which is kind of like the blueprint for the fantasy genre in a lot of ways. In a similar fashion, I think Dune really is the blueprint for sci-fi, science fiction, science fantasy. I think that really is the blueprint for the genre. Some could argue it's the foundation. We're not going to go there. But yeah, I think Dune really is the blueprint in that like so many things in the science fiction genre just naturally draw on Dune, even if like you've never read or experienced Dune, like you've experienced things that like directly like are inspired by it. Number one, Star Wars. Like if you've experienced both, Star Wars and Dune are very, very similar. So I think that is like one of the biggest things. And then we move into the movies themselves, where now Lord of the Rings was like this huge film trilogy that really established itself as the fantasy film trilogy that was very faithful in a lot of ways. Obviously, there's some changes, but really brought a lot of fans into the genre, brought a lot of fans into reading the books, and really kind of like set the stage for what's to come in terms of fantasy in TV and film. And I think Dune is now coming in kind of doing the same thing, where obviously we don't have all 3 movies yet, so knock on wood that the 3rd movie is really, really good and like kind of closes out the trilogy in a great way. But it's the same kind of blueprint where it's taken this iconic book series that a lot of people thought up until this point was unadaptable, but has been like a mainstay in the genre for so long. And now it's gotten a really well done, again, somewhat faithful, somewhat changed adaptation with an amazing cast, with a world that's like super well realized. Like the worlds of Middle Earth is super well realized in the movie series, the same way that Arrakis and Giedi Prime and like all the worlds in Dune are like super well realized here in this film trilogy, or currently duology. And it's all masterminded by like one dude. So like you have Peter Jackson in the first for Lord of the Rings. Now you have Denis Villeneuve with this trilogy. So I think there's just a lot of similarities on that level, both in the book world, but also now that they're becoming a movie series as well, that like I think it's impossible to kind of separate. And I think Dune and Lord of the Rings have been connected as far back as the books themselves. And now that they're both kind of becoming wildly successful movie trilogies that hopefully have 3 really good movies in them, I think that just makes the connection like even clearer for me. And I'll stop there if anyone else wants to like hop in to disagree or go off any of my points.
I do want to make just a one quick note, and John has alluded to it a couple of times. I think I did earlier as well, but at the time of recording this video, only Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 are out, so we are awaiting the coming release of Dune Part 3. Hopefully this video will also be published before Dune Part 3 comes out. Hopefully it's not too long between the recording and the publication of the video. But yeah, thank you for that lovely introduction,
you can just
John.
ADR it in every time I say, like, when it comes out, just be like, Dune 3, which is already out.
Sure, yeah. Hopefully we don't get to that point. But no, thank you for that great introduction, John. I don't think that Dune is the next Lord of the Rings, but
Agreed.
I'm going to go ahead and let Robert elaborate on that, because I know he and I share the same opinion, although I think Robert likes Dune more than I do. So
I do. I love Dune.
Yeah. I mean, I like Dune. I don't dislike Dune. And I'll talk about my experiences with the films a little bit later. But Robert, if you want to hop in on this discussion, feel free.
Yeah. So I would disagree in saying that Dune is the new Lord of the Rings, and that's not for like that is not to critique Dune or Lord of the Rings, because they're both stories that I really like. They do have similarities. I think that you pointed out most of them written around the same time. They're sci-fi and fantasy epics that really have expanded the scope of the genres and really did like change the scene and influence the genre. Like sci-fi and fantasy are different pre and post Lord of the Rings and pre and post Dune, and I would even go as far to say that, like, even though Lord of the Rings is fantasy and Dune is sci-fi, like, I wouldn't say that Lord of the Rings influence stops in fantasy, and I'd say the same thing with Dune and sci-fi. Like, they're massively, wildly influential books that, most modern writers today who work in the genre, people like Patrick Rothfuss and Brandon Sanderson, like, will harken back to influences from both of them. Yeah, so like I'm a massive fan of both. I haven't read Dune Messiah, but I have read just the first book.
I do have a question real quick that I want to ask. Lord of the Rings is a trilogy. How many Dune books are there?
Great question.
I believe that there are 6.
So, yes and no. So there are 6 that are written by Frank Herbert, the original author.
Right.
But then his son eventually took over has written a whole heck of a lot more. So now there's like 20 something, or who knows how many. But the original series written by the original author, there are 6. Yes.
But from a cinematic standpoint, the Lord of the Rings and Dune will both be trilogies.
Correct. They will be trilogies, but similar to, not to continue on my points anymore, I'll hand it back after this. But there is definitely an opportunity for it to mirror Lord of the Rings in that there's the original trilogy, and then there is a other trilogy similar to The Hobbit that comes out with like the other books, which I think would be really cool. But I'll hand it back to Robert.
Okay. Yeah, because I would say that if you're compartmentalizing it like to the movies, I feel like that does give you, even though I would still disagree that it's like the same, that would give you, I think, a stronger case that these two things are more like each other. Because the book series spans millenniums. It's the Dune series. The emphasis of Frank Herbert's novels and the scope of it covers like the history of the planet of Dune.
Wow.
Where Lord of the Rings, the novels at least, are much more, focused on the Fellowship and Frodo and, the journey of the ring. And Dune and Dune Messiah are the first two books in the Dune series, and they deal with Paul Atreides. But Paul Atreides does not really exist in the same way narratively in the books that come after, because the series is about the fate of the planet and the changing of the planet. The movies are going to stop it short with the same protagonist, and they're not going to, as far as we know, at least Denis Villeneuve's films are not going to include the rest of the thing. But just to kind of give, I think, like a bit more of a reason why I think that they're not, even though once again, I'm not critiquing anything, but I say in ways that they are similar is that the main characters in the stories do share kind of similar arcs. And in that sense, they're chosen ones, so to speak, who have this great task fall upon their shoulders, going up against like immense odds in order to bring goodness and justice and balance to their kingdoms, to their universe, And while these two arcs do kind of share like a similar, and I think that this is another thing that does draw like the comparison, do kind of share a similar like shape. The arc that these two stories have for their main characters is like a very old writing like staple that has existed for almost as long as stories have existed, that we've kind
Like
of come
the
to label
hero's
as
journey?
the hero's journey. And I would, beyond that, like, I think that these movies get, like, it's easier to kind of compare the arcs here because these were two movies or two novels that really famously took the hero's journey and expanded it to such epic proportion, and across such a vast scope, like over kingdoms and in entire worlds and through other planets, So they're very similar in like the way that they, brought it up and out and through kind of like a much larger story. But it is like a very old and frequently used arc. And I think that my biggest thing of the reason why that these two things are not like the other is like, I think that Dune and Lord of the Rings, Dune is way less accessible than Lord of the Rings. Like Lord of the Rings is a very, very straightforward hero's journey. And I feel like Frank Herbert takes Paul Atreides, puts him through the same arc, but complicates it with intergalactic politics and intergalactic drug trade. And it's a lot more cerebral and involved. Whereas, Tolkien's is very, very straightforward, clear cut, very clear to understand the forces of evil against the forces of good and the motivations behind each one. I would say that kind of just creates like a tone and a difference and like almost like a different way of storytelling that I feel like really, really does separate the two, because I feel like the heart of both movies and stories in general, it does translate to the book, in my opinion, just feels like vastly different. I do feel like they're vastly different tones, vastly different ways in which the characters interact with the worlds. The stakes are developed out of extremely different things. And I as much as I love Dune, I would not go as far to say that I care for Paul as a character the same way that I care for anyone from like Lord of the Rings. I don't think that that's where Dune's strength lies. Like it is so much more heady. It's in the interplay of politics, the extremely like spiritual overtones, and just kind of this transcendental, almost like hallucinatory at times, like sci-fi, tale that I think is just a lot more abstract in a lot of ways, and just a lot more. I'm kind of blanking on any more adjectives. I'm running out of
no.
My bag is running empty.
You're good.
But I do just think that the stories, while I think are just comparable in the fact that they're just like epics in genres that kind of get grouped together. You go into Barnes and Nobles and it's sci-fi and fantasy together,
Right.
and like are comparable because they have a lot of like intricate lore and the world building. Frank Herbert famously spent about 5 years developing the ecology of
The ecology, yeah.
the
He was weirdly
ecology
into ecology.
of the planet of Dune. And I think J.R.R. Tolkien famously like invented entire languages for his books, and in that way, the origins are very similar, and the worlds are very dense and deep and complex. But I think that once you step outside of kind of just the more like attributes of the story, and you go into more of just like the heart and the characters, and just the way that like the modes through which the author is telling the story, like one is so much more streamlined, simple, like a moral tale, of like good versus evil. It's very clear. It's very heartfelt. And then one is so much more like political and complicated and cerebral and almost impersonal in a lot of ways. And I think to me, that's like the disconnect there is kind of what keeps me from saying that these two things are each other. And I think I'll land the plan there, actually. As we,
Okay.
I'm sure that we can go into the nuances more as we kind of, yeah.
You know what I find pretty interesting about the contrast of the two protagonists, Paul Atreides and Frodo Baggins? I was talking to John about this before we started recording. It's interesting to me that both of them have very different heroes' journeys, because it's very clear. And again, I've only seen the films, the two films that have come out so far for Dune. But Paul's destiny was thrust upon him. He was born into his destiny, whereas Frodo chose his destiny. And I just think that's a very interesting contrast.
Yeah. Well, there's a contrast, but also like one of the big questions of Dune is that like, was Paul actually chosen for this? Like, we don't really know, That's like one of the big questions.
Well, I think the movies make it very clear that he was.
The movies and like the characters themselves in the story, I think all kind of buy into it to some extent. But I think as a reader or as a viewer, like the question's always going to be there lingering of like, especially with the Fremen prophecy, like we know in the universe that was like constructed by the Bene Gesserit. So like, is he actually the Muad'Dib? Or sorry, is he actually the Mahdi, the Messiah, the Lisan al-Gaib? I know there's so many words. Technically, we don't know because we don't even know if it's legit. And then there's the Kwisatz Haderach thing, which we also don't even know in the movies if he is that either. So surely there's the position to be made that he is born into it. But I think there's a lot of arguments to be made that he actually is just choosing this path. But I think that is just one of the more intricate questions of Dune, to Robert's point, that like Dune gets much more into the intricacies and the details of these kind of things, whereas Lord of the Rings is just like, yep, we're on a quest for this ring and that's really it. Nobody asks any deeper questions. It's fine. We're here for the vibes. And like, yeah, I think that is like a really important difference. I could keep going, but I want to make sure Colin didn't have any other thoughts or Robert didn't have any other thoughts.
At some point, I just want to talk about my history with the Dune movies, because it's quite a tale, to a degree. But if you got more to say, John, go for it.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I butt in
Robert?
for 2 seconds? Because I just had this
butt
thought.
in.
But I think that like so much of this question, as much as like I hate being this guy, I am the guy who's going to say it's all subjective.
Absolutely.
Because
absolutely.
I think, because I do think that like we've mentioned like similarities and dissimilarities between the two. And I think that like how you answer this question fully depends on like what the Lord of the Rings movies are to you and what is Dune to you.
You're in my head. You're in my head.
Oh, man.
I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. No,
he's not leaving.
I stay here.
You're in my head, man. Get out of my head. Get out of my head.
I do think that for me, just I know that the way that I interact with the two stories and what I get out of Dune and what I get out of Lord of the Rings, and the reason why I'm drawn to these stories individually is different enough for me to like say, no, I don't think that Dune and Lord of the Rings are the same. I get different things out of them. And I go to them for different reasons and I have different histories with them. But if you're someone who like for the case of just being reductive and making a point, just like watches and consumes stories because you love the intricacies of like, you know, world building and lore and the mythos around just, you know, a fantastical construction. Yeah, like of course, like these two things are wildly similar. And so I don't know. I'll leave it there. John.
No, I think that's exactly what I was thinking. Like I said, that like at the end of the day, like if you like, I go to Lord of the Rings, and I'm sure other people do, for like the good vibes, and I come out of it feeling like very wholesome and like warm and fuzzy about life, because it's like a very inspiring, heartfelt tale about good conquering evil. That like when you watch the trilogy and you leave it, you're like, wow, what a grand adventure I've just gone on. Whereas if you're going to Dune for that, you're probably not going to get it. Dune is not good vibes necessarily. And that you don't really leave with the same warm and fuzzy feeling that you get like singing Into the West as like the Return of the King credits roll.
But Paul's choices as a character are just so much more like have so much more moral grayness to them and are so much more thorny and come with so much they're so much more of a double-edged sword. Like Frodo is like throw the ring into the volcano and destroy all of evil.
That's it. Everything's
you know what I mean?
Everything's gone. Evil over.
And it's all good. But like, you know,
Paul does not really have that same option of just destroying all of evil just like instantly.
Yeah, Paul starts a war.
Yeah, he starts a holy war.
Yeah.
Wait, question the question war. Of what or who is evil in Dune is like an entire dissertation you could go into, whereas in Lord of the Rings it's like
that's a good point.
Pretty like cut and dry. But like that's one of the things that I think, like when I think about them, the two of them together, I think it's really interesting that at least for me, the differences that they have like are somewhat in conversation with each other in a really interesting way. Like both the similarities and differences, because like I think one thing that's really cool that I think beyond the broad strokes of like epic fantasies with really in-depth lore and like really in-depth characters, I think they also tackle the same things just in very different ways. So like one of the big ones is that Tolkien, obviously very religious man, a lot of that comes out in Lord of the Rings, in that good versus evil, good conquers all kind of like happy ending kind of thing. And like that was one of his very like strong held beliefs. Whereas Herbert, not very religious. He was pretty sure he was just agnostic most of his entire life. And a lot of that comes out in his exploration of religion in Dune. Whereas in Lord of the Rings, it's like very positive vibes. Dune religion is like almost just like a construct where it's like this whole like, oh, the Bene Gesserits just constructed this religion for their own purposes. And so like we're kind of going into this deeper examination of religion, and it's like, is a messiah figure good? Or kind of like Chani says throughout, like, is this just a construct to like put people in their place and make them easier to like rule over, essentially?
Manipulate.
Yeah, manipulate. Yeah. So it's like they're both examining religion, which is a similarity, but they do it in vastly different ways. Same thing with like environmentalism. Like in Lord of the Rings, you have this whole arc around Saruman and like deforestation, and like that was clearly a really important topic to him. In the same way that Frank Herbert, like you have this planet that's basically just being sucked dry of its resources. So like environmentalism is obviously just a huge thing that both of these authors wanted to tackle. Same thing with like war. I think it's very like important that the weapons used in Dune like are just atomic warheads. Like this is way in the future. Like they did not, the Atreides family did not need to have atomic warheads in their basement. It could have been futuristic bomb number 3, but like very specifically it is nuclear warheads. And like there's a lot of anti-war messaging in Lord of the Rings as well. So I think it is interesting. Like that's one of the things that jumps out to me a lot, is that watching these two like back to back, or like consuming them back to back, yes, there is a lot different about them and like how they handle their themes or like what they have to say. But it's really interesting to me that both of them kind of touch on very similar things, just in like vastly different ways. Kind of similar to like what Robert, you were saying, that like I think Dune just like takes some of these questions and these themes and just goes a little bit deeper and like a little bit more nuanced with them. But to your point, like if I'm going into this, like if Lord of the Rings is good vibes and wholesome times for me, I'm not going to compare it to Dune, because that's not a wholesome time at all.
No, yeah, I would kind of like what you said about like in the ways that they are different, the differences are kind of in conversation with each other, and that makes them more like, even like adds to their differences kind of being even like in a weird way another similarity between the two. Lewis and Tolkien both being
also beefed a little bit,
but both being like religious and have I think what may be just even more of like a one-to-one comparable series of like Narnia and Lord of the Rings, of like very good versus evil, like at least in kind of the way that they're approaching the morality of their story, and the way that they set up like a good versus evil, and the just the clear line in the sand between it all. Then the way that Herbert tries to do it, like religion is so much more of like a shifty like thing that you're just kind of like, is it safe? Is it unsafe? Is it genuine? Is this just like a tool of, like what Colin said, manipulation? And I just really like that thought of them being, like talking about the same thing, but in so many different, but in just like under vastly different personal contexts. Like, just with the fact that the authors are different people and had different viewpoints and different worldviews, and to see the way that that shaped the way that they like constructed their story, and the way that that affects just the way that their characters see good and, or the like the way that their stories see good and evil. Good. It's good. It's a good point.
It's good.
That's good.
It's good. No, like I think it's really interesting. Like I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that like Tolkien, at the end of the day, and even he said this about fantasy, just like as a genre, or fairy stories as he called it, like he thinks that those stories should be escapist, like they should have a happy ending, and it should be a very optimistic tale. Whereas Herbert clearly came in and was like, this is going to be very realistic, like maybe a little bit erring to the side of pessimism, but like you could also say it's just more realism. But I think at the end of the day, something that like I think I take away from both is that in both worlds, like in both fantasy worlds, whether it's full of elves or full of like all these like other weird planetary things, both stories are very human in nature. Like it's very much, they both examine humanity, their flaws, their what makes them strong, and like at the end of the day, that's kind of what we're thinking about is like humanity. Why is it good? Why is it bad? And I think Lord of the Rings, you kind of come out being like, humanity is great, and we're always going to conquer evil, which is very hopeful. And Dune, it's clear that humanity is still very important, and I think there's still some hopeful messaging that you get out of Dune. It's just counterbalanced by like this element of, but there's also evil and like questionable gray morality also within humanity that you also have to tackle, which is like a little bit more of a realistic take, but not necessarily like any more important than Tolkien's very optimistic take.
No, and I think it's kind of interesting because I almost see them as like untangling the same problem, but at like a different, at like different levels. Because I think that every single person at like a base, if you were going to be like reductive about your worldview, could probably compartmentalize in broad strokes: good, evil, bad, good. Like always do this, never do this. Doing this is better than doing this. Be this person, don't be this person. But then like when you start getting into these specific circumstances of just like, you kind of have the broad ends in mind of just like, this is what a good world looks like, and this is what a bad world looks like. And Tolkien is kind of playing with a much more, like you said, ultimately hopeful messaging, point of view. But, Herbert's is so much more like thorny of just like, for good to come about, how much compromise like realistically has to happen. Can a pure intention, be brought to fruition without compromise?
Can there be a 100% good ending where everyone's
can there be a
happy
100% good ending? Like people are always getting short ends of the sticks, and like there's just so many sacrifices. It is interesting though, because like you'd think that in Herbert's book he would make like a little bit more of like maybe paint a little bit more of like a morally ambiguous line. Like you're like, oh my gosh, the John, tell me if I'm pronouncing this right because I haven't really interacted with the some Dune stuff in a while. But like the Harkonians.
Oh, the Harkonnens.
Harkonnens.
Yeah, Harkonnens.
Because they're pretty much like in the same way that you can kind of paint Mordor as breeding like a spawning point of evil. The Harkonnens are pretty like almost
they're
equally,
pretty evil. They're pretty bad,
evil through and through. And so it's
Yeah.
interesting that like the complexity doesn't really lie for Herbert in like what is evil, because he paints that pretty clearly. And there's not really a sympathetic character to that side of the thing.
Yeah.
But the line of like what is good is kind of where you start having to squint and where things start getting a little fuzzy. And I think that's kind of like an interesting thing as well.
Yeah. No, I didn't think about that, but that is true. I think it is interesting as well that like both of the, kind of like what you said before, which really stuck out to me, was like they're both tackling the same idea, which is also, it's interesting. And I think it makes sense that both of these kind of came out around the same time, like World War II, post World War II kind of era, very messy era in humans' history, where like you see that obviously really come out in Lord of the Rings. There's a lot of like post-war trauma, and I think both stories are really post-war trauma vibes, or like inspired by post-war trauma. And I think kind of like you said, they're both just tackling it in different ways, where Tolkien said, in order to like get over this trauma, we need escapist fantasy where good conquers evil, and it's going to give us hope, and that's what we need to move on. Whereas Herbert says, no, we need to like tackle these issues head on. We need to like think about it from a more realistic lens, and like think about how history repeats itself, and like all these things. And that's how we're going to like more closely examine it to better face it like in our own world. And I think at the end of the day, both viewpoints are valid. Like some people are going to want to escape into the world of Middle Earth where everything like gets solved relatively with a cleaner thing. Oh, go ahead, Colin. I pick you.
No.
You're saying
I want to escape into the world of Middle Earth. Yeah.
Some people want to escape into the world of Middle Earth where everything gets solved relatively cleanly, but some people are going to want to gravitate to Dune where things are a little bit more murky, and that allows them to kind of more closely tackle those issues they're facing like in real life, which like is also helpful in a lot of ways.
Now, guys, I do want to jump in real quick. We've been doing a lot of talking about Tolkien, a lot of talking about Herbert, but I want to talk a bit more about Jackson and Villeneuve. So what are your guys' thoughts on these films? Again, we've already said Dune Part 3 is not here yet, but from a cinematic standpoint, what sets them apart, and what
brings them together?
What brings them together?
Happy to start with the similarities. I think, which is again kind of something indifferent, but like both have amazing casts where like everyone is like doing a great job acting, and like all the characters I think really leap off the screen, and you're like, I can't picture anyone else in this role other than who they chose, whether it's like Frodo, whether it's Paul. I think the acting across the board is really good. Similarly, I think both of the worlds are like incredibly well realized. Obviously in Lord of the Rings' case, it's very practical.
Right.
But in Dune, Denis is like does amazing work in the digital realm. Like if you watch any of his movies, all of the visions of all of the worlds that he works in are just so incredibly well realized, whether it's Arrival, whether it's Blade Runner. And I think he does an amazing job of that here. Like you really feel like you're living in the world of Dune. And I mean, this is like a little bit more baseline, but like both of them have like amazing scores from like amazing composers.
They do, although I would, you know what, before I even make that comment, let me just butt in on this whole conversation.
Go ahead,
real
butt
quick.
in.
I have not made a video on Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy yet, because I'm saving it for when the time is right. But those three movies are my favorite movies of all time, and I love everything about them. I love the books. I am completely biased when it comes to this
At least he's honest.
whole argument. But again, talking about the movies specifically, you mentioned, John, the cast.
Yes.
I am not a huge fan all the time of ensemble casts. And
Yes.
I do prefer the approach taken by Peter Jackson with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, where, of course, you had a couple
Big names.
Christopher Lee, Ian McKellen. But the cast was relatively
Unknown at the time.
Some of them were unknown. Some of them were lesser known, smaller names. Dune, like everybody, is famous.
Big names.
Big names. And if I'm being totally honest, sometimes ensemble casts pull me out of the film.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, in that regard, Lord of the Rings, for me, wins, even though I already admitted it'll win in every category.
Yeah.
Who knows? Dune Part 3 could be...
Oh, it could blow him out of the water.
Could just blow me away. But we're not there yet. But, yeah, I just...
it's a fair point. For me, with the exception for one person, for me, all of the Dune cast, even though they are like ensemble and all very famous, I don't see Timothée Chalamet. Like I see Paul Atreides. Like there's no, like, it doesn't take me out of it.
There is no Timothée Chalamet role that I see where I don't see Timothée Chalamet.
That's fair. But for me, it all works in a very similar fashion to Lord of the Rings.
John and I had a conversation before the recording, and I want to ask Robert this question because John just stated that there's one actor that takes him out of the movie a little bit. Robert, can you guess which actor John is referring to?
Is it Christopher Walken?
It's Christopher Walken. Don't know why he's the Emperor, and he just shows up and is like, "I'm Christopher Walken, Paul Atreides. My daughter's hand in marriage."
But don't get me wrong. I mean, the performances are still great.
He does a good job. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, I'm not saying Christopher Walken's performance is great. I feel like he had a very limited.
He doesn't even do much.
He doesn't do much. But I'm talking about Timothée Chalamet, Josh Brolin, Oscar Isaac, Zendaya, and my favorite actually is Rebecca Ferguson.
She's great.
She's great.
Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2. Fantastic.
I really love Stilgar, personally.
Javier Bardem.
Every time he gets that, Lisa no Gaib, I just lose it.
But no, we also, or John, I think you mentioned score at some point, both having great scores. Both. I do prefer the Lord of the Rings score just because it was a huge part of my childhood. I could probably hum almost every major theme in those three movies. But it is kind of funny, and this isn't necessarily important to talk about, but it's funny how both Dune and the Lord of the Rings suffered from the Oscars, the Academy making a change in how they I guess in which movies would qualify for the Oscar for Best Original Score.
The rules around it.
Yeah, because in the case of The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring won Best Original Score, and then when Two Towers came out, they had a rule in place where they said, oh, you can't reuse music, or, you can't recycle tunes or themes. I'm using the wrong terminology, but whatever. You get the point. But then when Return of the King came out, they got rid of the rule. And Return of the King also won the Oscar for Best Original Score, and then they changed the rule again by the time Dune Part 2 came out, so it was not eligible for an Oscar.
The Academy hates Denis. That's my conspiracy theory. I don't know what Denis did, but the Academy hates him.
Can I real quick talk about my history with Dune?
Sure, why not?
Just because
Get it in there.
To me, it's funny. I have always known Dune existed, and that actually is because when I was younger, I won't say how old because I don't want to date myself.
Dox himself.
Yeah, exactly. But when I was reading the book Aragon, written by then young Christopher Paolini.
Great book.
I remember learning that he was a big fan of the book Dune because he's a big sci-fi guy. And he ultimately wrote his own sci-fi novel. Need to read that. But I was like, oh, okay, Dune. I'll look into it. I never read it, but I knew of its existence.
But he looked into it.
But I looked into it. In 2021, when Dune Part 1 came out, I went with John and some other friends to see it, and I was really hyped because everyone had told me that this was going to be like the next big thing.
Next Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, to a degree. And it was so gosh darn slow, I fell asleep in the movie theater.
He said.
And I was like, well, that was not Lord of the Rings. So when it comes out on Blu-ray, I'll just buy it or rent it, whatever. I bought it. And I'll watch it again. And I did. And I still fell asleep again.
Disappointing.
And then when Dune Part 2 came out, I didn't even bother going to the movie theater because I knew I'd fall asleep. So I waited till that came out on Blu-ray. Bought the Blu-ray, put it on. Guess what I did?
fall asleep.
I fell asleep
He
again.
fell asleep.
So, yeah, I don't think there has been a time where I've watched a Dune
Disappointing.
movie without falling asleep, and I've seen both movies now 3 times each in preparation for
Rough.
this recording. So, yeah, even I don't like that. Like, I don't like that I fall asleep. I want to be awake for these
A big
movies.
difference from the trilogies for Colin. He falls asleep during one, does not fall asleep for the other.
Exactly. And these are gorgeous films, the
They are
Dune
gorgeous
films.
films.
I
Both of them
wish
are
I could
gorgeous
be awake
films.
to enjoy them.
Robert, what are your
yeah.
cinema thoughts?
Cinema thoughts are I kind of lean a little bit more with Colin in this one. I do kind of think that the characterization is different between it all. I do kind of see Zendaya, Jason Momoa, Josh Brolin.
I forgot about Jason Momoa.
Yeah, my boy Duncan Idaho, best character.
I see them. I see the actors a lot more than I see the characters. I think that there is like a lot less nuances in the performances that they're doing. Everyone's just a lot more like stone faced, a little bit more serious. Like there's a lot less and I don't mean this negatively, but it's just like the Dune movies are a less expressive movie than Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And to me, another one of the differences between the two is just the way that they make me feel differently like that. And I think, great scores both around. I think that the Lord of the Rings scores are like decidedly a lot more romantic, and I do think that the Dune movies are largely more just kind of more, they're trying, like they're pursuing a different experience,
Yeah.
A lot of that second movie is just very drugged out. And like I said, spiritually, like has a lot of spiritual overtones and things about like prophecy and ancestry and heritage and like it. And I think that the way that these stories, like one is so much more conceptual, and it's more about the ideas that are happening, and and Lord of the Rings is a lot more humanist. And I think that I'm going to make like a big swing with this claim.
Oh, go ahead.
But the Lord of the Rings were epic and pushed the envelope in ways that I don't think that Dune pushed the envelope.
Okay.
I think that there was more innovation. Peter Jackson broke more ground with the Lord of the Rings films, and there was just so much in there that was done for the first time or done to a scale that we've never seen before. And I think that has the benefit of it coming out in the early 2000s. And right now in Dune, like as I mean, Roger Deakins, potentially like the greatest cinematographer ever, and definitely probably like the most prolific one alive today. I'm not like slighting his work at all. But we just have so much more available to us, and Dune reaches a scale that I don't think is like foreign and something that we've never seen before. And it's like,
at least not at this point.
Not at this point. Like directors like Christopher Nolan and James Cameron, and I'm sure I'm missing some other big developments as well, have like pushed the envelope.
I mean, even Denis himself, honestly.
Even
like I said, Blade
Denis
Runner
himself, with Blade Runner, I think that Blade Runner is a more immersive world than cinematically than the Dune movies are.
Interesting.
But also I do think that like the Dune movies themselves are also like less fun. Not bad, but they're less fun. I'm never thinking, oh my gosh, I want to be on Arrakis. That thing is like white and hot and sandy and like it's not the same. It's not the same pull. It's not one's, we've mentioned it before so many times, one's escapist. One's not. Those are in the source materials. I don't know if you can kind of like, pull off. I don't know if you can bridge that gap. Without
most of the time, if someone's like, "I'm gonna throw on Lord of the Rings," they're probably not also like, "Or I guess we could throw on Dune." Similar vibes.
Yeah.
Very,
so
very
darker.
different vibes.
Very different vibes.
Yeah.
I think that Dune is just so much more. I think I said it before. It's so much more of like this brutalist, abstract kind of like sci-fi political, like political inferno head trip, you know?
Yes,
It's
I like that.
and to me that just is like so different from what I feel Lord of the Rings is. I love Dune. I remember when Dune 2 came out, I like rewatched the first Dune movie, saw the second Dune movie that evening, and then woke up the next day and went back to the theater after that. And I think
Yeah.
I think I saw Dune 1 and then Dune 2 twice, and that was all within 24 hours.
Mhm.
So I was in
Did
it.
you fall asleep once?
I did not fall asleep at all. I think Colin and I have talked about this off the podcast, but I'll say it here. But I like the first one better than I like the second one for Dune.
Of Dune?
Of Dune.
Oh wow,
That is a hot take. But
I actually don't remember us talking.
It's not
about
a hot
this.
take, but it's not even one that I necessarily like disagree with to some extent.
Yeah, I just love kind of just the more paranoid,
Mhm.
kind of shadowy, backstabbing politics, assassination attempts.
Very Game of Thronesy.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read or watched Game of Thrones,
Never
but
mind.
I'll take your word
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah.
I love that in the first one. I mean,
I agree.
I think that first movie to me cinematically is just such a like I'm so impressed with its ability to kind of stay so vague and wordless. And it's if any movie like demanded, if any story demanded to have heavy expositional dumps,
Yes.
to set up its story, it would be Dune. But
they don't.
so much of that movie, I think, is like done, at least in that first half, is done
Mhm.
with long extended periods of silence,
Mhm.
and is wordless. And to me, that's a tribute to Denis Villeneuve's filmmaking and visual storytelling, which I think is something that we have really lost a sense of with a lot of modern movies, of just carrying a film's idea through its visuals, and letting kind of like the world that you're creating in front of the lens speak for itself. And I don't know, I'm a huge fan of the first Dune movie, just because it has kind of like that very tense subtlety to it. And the second movie is awesome and so cool, but it kind of does go into like this more like sci-fi action epic
yeah.
kind of like action and big
It's very like
things and
Infinity War versus
explosions.
Endgame vibes.
Yeah, which I don't hate again, but I'm just saying that there's one that kind of like excites me a little bit more than the other.
I think kind of like what you said about the world of Arrakis and how it's presented in the Dune series. I think one of the biggest differences, and like kind of you alluded to this as well, between the two cinematically, is how welcoming Lord of the Rings is into you of the world of the Middle Earth, where I took a note about this, but it's like very surface level. Both movies start with a woman giving you a monologue, somewhat setting up the story in the world.
One is much more in depth than the other.
In Lord of the Rings, you get a like multi-minute long monologue setting up the world, the conflict. You learn basically everything you need to know for like the next 2 hours, kind of like in this one moment. Whereas in Dune, you get Chani talking about the conflict and like her people a little bit, which kind of like sets the tone, kind of sets the stage. And then after that, it really just kind of throws you into it. So like Lord of the Rings, it really takes the time to make sure that you know everything, that you're feeling comfortable. You're like, oh, take your shoes off, get nice and cozy. Dune said, we're throwing you into the deep end. We're going to hit you with like 50 million catchphrases. Muad'Dib, Mahdi, Kwisatz Haderach, Bene Gesserit. We're not going to tell you what any of them mean. You're just going to have to kind of figure it out as you go along. And there's so many like random sci-fi like inventions and like things like that, whereas like if this was Tolkien, if this was Lord of the Rings, they'd sit you down and be like, oh, this is Mithril, which was like invented by like the dwarves, and then the elves made it. But in Dune, they're just like, here's this thing. What does it do? You're going to find out. We're not going to tell you though. Sometimes you won't even find out. There's like the whole map system where like the Harkonnens are like sitting around this map and they're all chanting for some reason. No idea why they're chanting, no idea what's going on there, but it's cool. But they're never going to dive into it. So Arrakis does a lot of kind of like what Robert was saying. I don't know if this is the right word, but like it's kind of like diegetic storytelling or like world building, where you're kind of just learning about the world by watching the film and kind of being in it. Whereas Lord of the Rings takes the time to like explain things to you. And again, I think both ways are valid, but very different ways in how they choose to set up their worlds. So again, to kind of like, I guess, cap off my thoughts, when I think of the two trilogies, like or soon to be trilogies, as being connected, yes, everything I said before about the stories and the themes and the authors apply, but cinematically, just very broadly, I think they're both amazingly well realized worlds in the fantasy-ish genre that like I lose myself in. But to Colin and Robert's point, I think they have very different ways of drawing you in, very different vibes. And so like in that way, I think they're very different, but like very broadly, they're related in my mind, just purely because of that, of them being film trilogies that are very well realized worlds with like similar great casts, score, etc. But I think I'm kind of separating them a little bit more, I think, thanks to you both.
Oh wow.
But that's my thoughts. I'll hand it over to anyone else who wants to go in.
And if I had to be reductive, I would say the reason why I feel like these movies aren't like each other for me is because they just feel different.
Yeah.
And that would be
They
kind
do
of
feel-
just my...
Yeah.
Feel very different.
That's what,
That
that's a
would
great
just-
way of summing it up, honestly. And
that
I
would just
can't
be
really
my
disagree with that.
summary. Yeah.
They do feel different. I leave Lord of the Rings sobbing multiple times, haven't cried once during Dune.
Colin cried out of boredom.
Yeah, he's like, please let it end.
No. I before we end this recording, I do want to specify that I am by no means a Dune hater. I don't know if I've said that already or not. I fall asleep very easily these days. The older I get. But anyways, so yeah, I have watched both Dune Part 1 and Part 2 over the weekend leading up to this recording, and I really enjoyed both of them, more so this time around than the first two times, even if I did fall asleep again. But anyways, this leads me to like a final question I want to ask you guys. And I know Dune already has a spin-off TV show, Dune Prophecy. I've
True.
not seen it.
Me neither.
But would Dune have benefited from being a TV series instead of a film trilogy? And granted, the third film's not out yet. We keep saying that.
Mhm.
But would it have benefited from that treatment?
I think in the same way that you could say that Lord of the Rings could have benefited from being a TV series, just purely based off of it gets more time to do stuff. Sure. But I think what we got was amazing. For the record, I rate both films 5 out of 5. Like, they're both perfect films for me. Somewhat perfect. As perfect as you can get.
Nice.
What flaws they have, I don't care about enough to detract stars from, at the very least. So yes, I'm sure we could have benefited just from more time. Like, I technically wish they were doing extended cuts similar to Lord of the Rings. I think that would actually make it even better for me. Obviously, that would just be more time for Colin to be asleep. But yeah, sure, it could have benefited a little bit from being a TV show in the same way I think Lord of the Rings could do the same, just because it would have more time to do stuff.
Lord of the Rings was almost a TV show if HBO had won
True.
the television rights and
Maybe
not.
we would have gone Tom freaking Bombadil. Sorry.
We did get Tom Bombadil.
Yeah, when they're on in the other show.
In the other show, yeah. But yeah, Robert, do you have an opinion on the matter? If it would have benefited from being a television series?
Yeah, and I'm going to say no. Just because I think that a book is not a movie and a movie is not exactly like a book. And I think that that's for very good reason. I think that books have the allowance of being denser. And I think the fact that you have to take these extremely lore-heavy stories and kind of condense them down into something that's a little bit more compact actually helps streamline the story, because I don't think
fair.
even if you gave it 10 hours to be, well, Lord of the Rings is already over more than 10 hours
Yeah.
to be a miniseries.
Just because
If
it's
you
10
gave it-
hours doesn't make it better.
Yeah, a cinematic like thing, whether it would be a movie or a show, would never be able to kind of like match the density that you're able to put into a book. And I think that if you try and capture that density by giving a story like that more time, you just end up in a world of exposition.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I
That's
think
fair.
that
Yeah,
one of
that's
the and to go back to it, I love the first Dune movie just
Mhm.
because there's so much restraint in that area, and I think that it creates a lot of intrigue and tension, and
True.
so that's why I would say no.
I agree with that.
And you know what? I think I'm also in agreement. And not because it would have given me more time to doze off. It's because, watching the movies again like I said, over the weekend, I'm thinking to myself, would this have been a good TV show, or would
Mhm.
it have been better as a TV show? And then I just came to the realization during Dune Part 2, no, because visually this is stunning
Yeah.
cinema, and we need more of that.
Why ruin perfection?
They are beautiful films.
I think what's really good about
yeah.
the Dune movies is they take what is cinematic about the book
Mhm.
and put it on the screen.
True.
And I think that if I wanted to get the intricacies of Dune in the same
read the
way that the book gives it, I would read the book again. And
Very
There you
fair.
go.
I
Very
think
fair.
that's like the book is there.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
that the movie and the book are there for different reasons.
I love that.
Nice.
Snaps.
Well, we're just about out of time, but this just came to my mind right now, literally.
We're doing it live.
We're doing it live. The novels, the books, The Lord of the Rings and Dune. Supposedly, in the past, some said they could never be adapted.
Mm.
And I believe both had, I don't want to use the word failed, but
Oh, yes.
failed adaptations in the past.
Less good adaptations, yes.
Dune, I'm not as familiar with, but
Shout
we
out
had
David
the
Lynch.
1978 Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings, which was really just half a movie. It was never finished.
Same with Dune, actually.
There you go. And Peter Jackson finally did it, and Denis Villeneuve finally did it, and he's going to hopefully do it again.
Hopefully finish it out.
December of 2026. All right, cool. I'm feeling pretty good about Dune. This has been a riveting discussion between lovers of Lord of the Rings and lovers of Dune.
And those in between.
I want to thank you, Robert, and thank you, John, for joining me for this discussion. It's been a fun one. And I want to thank all you guys for attending this Saga session. We hope to see you again next time when John and I rip apart Robert's letterboxed review
Oh, yeah.
of Hamnet.
Hamnet.
Yeah.
We can't go
Yeah.
to it now.
Ooh.
Sound off in the comments if
That's
you
right.
agree that Lord of the Rings and Dune are alike, or let us know why they're different and why.
Take care, everyone.
And go see Dune 3 whenever it comes out.